Study Session 12, The Social Learning Theory of Albert Bandura, Introduction. We will explore another theory on personality formation, which is that of Bandura's social learning theory. This school or theory differs from that of Freud in that it believes that personality is formed by learning from others, either as they are taught or from observing what others do. At the end of this study session, you should be able to 1. Discuss personality formation from the social learning point of view. 2. Explain the difference between social learning theory and other theory of personality formation. And 3. Explain Bandura's approach on personality assessment. The social learning theory. According to social learning theory, human behavior is mostly developed and learning principles are sufficient to explain the development and maintenance of human behavior. Bandura, 1977, thinks that human beings are not simply pawns of the environment. They think and regulate their own behavior. To him, a theory of personality must take account of the social context in which behavior is acquired and maintained. Bandura belongs to the school of social learning theorists who believe that behavior in its normal and abnormal manifestations are learned. However, he differs from other behaviorists in that he insists that much behavior takes place in the absence of any kind of reinforcement at all. In other words, Bandura is saying that every individual has an innate propensity for copying the behavior of others, even when no reward is given. Therefore, much learning takes place by imitation or modeling. He states that learning principles are sufficient to explain and predict behavior, as well as behavior change. Bandura theorized that observational learning has a major influence on an individual's personality development. He explains human behavior in terms of continuous reciprocal interaction between cognitive, behavioral, and environmental determinants. Within the process of reciprocal determinism lies the opportunity for people to influence their personality as well as the limits of self-direction. This conception of human functioning then neither casts people into the role of powerless objects controlled by environmental forces, nor free agents who can become whatever they choose. Both people and environment are reciprocal determinants of each other. Bandura's concept of personality development. Bandura postulates that an individual's personality develops from past social stimulus events, which include the nature and characteristics of the individual's social models. However, the individual is not considered a helpless robot with respect to external events. Rather, the reactions to these stimuli are self-activated in accordance with learned anticipations. The individual is able to observe and interpret the effects of his or her own behavior, and in that way determine which behavior is appropriate in which situation. People are able to encode and symbolize environmental events and to anticipate that certain behavior will bring a certain response. Thus, an individual is responsible for choosing and shaping his or her own behavior in order to gain anticipated rewards or avoid anticipated pain. Bandura believes that individuals can, in part, create their own environment and that abnormal behavior is nothing more than bad habits. These bad habits create constraints on the individual's capability to choose how he or she will respond to many situations. Also, sometimes the constraints are very binding, allowing the person little, if any, free choice of how to behave. For example, A person who must wash his or her hands 20 times each hour is not fully free. Such an individual is living within the constraints imposed by him or her. Bandura feels that behavior modification, a therapeutic technique, actually increases the person's freedom. He argues that by removing these constraining symptoms, behavior modification greatly increases the individual's true freedom and allows more opportunity for personal growth. Bandura put forward 4 interrelated mediation mechanisms that govern the nature of observational learning. These are: 1. The attention process. 2. The retention process. 3. The motor reproduction process. And 4. The incentive or motivational process. Attention process. This implies that modeling will not occur unless the subject attends to the model. In other words, merely exposing the subject to the model does not guarantee that the subject will be attentive to the relevant cues, will select the most relevant stimulus event, or will even perceive the stimulus situation accurately. It is not sufficient for the subject merely to see the model and what it is doing. The subject must attend to the model with enough perceptual accuracy to acquire the necessary information to use in imitating the model. Retention process. This mechanism requires the subject to retain and remember all significant aspects of the model's behavior, unless the subject is imitating the model's behavior as that behavior is taking place. If the subject cannot remember the behavior, he will not be able to imitate it 5 minutes or 5 days after observing it. In order to retain what has been attended to, therefore, it is necessary to encode and represent symbolically what has been seen. Motor reproduction process. This stage involves the translation of the 2 symbolic representations into overt behavior. Even though a person may have carefully formed and retained symbolic representations of models' behavior and silently rehearsed the behavior many times, he or she may not be able to perform the behavior correctly. This is particularly applicable to highly skilled acts of the model that require many individual component behaviors for their correct performance. Incentive and motivational process. Sufficient incentive or motivation is needed to attend to, retain the behavior of a model, and to perform that behavior. When sufficient incentives are available, modeling or observational learning is quickly translated into action. Much attention is not usually paid to something that has no incentives attached. When attention is not paid, there is little or nothing to retain. Bandura's assessment techniques. Unlike most of the other personality theorists, Bandura relies more on experimental methods to assess personality functioning and change. He believed that the most stringent tests of a theory are provided by anchoring a hypothesized mediator, e.g., a cognitive event, in an independently measurable indicant, and that the indicant is linked to overt behavior. In other words, Bandura was interested in demonstrating that experimental manipulations of antecedent events influence cognitive functioning, which in turn influences subsequent responses. If the problem area is complex and uncharted, Bandura thought it would be advantageous to begin by conducting field studies that are essentially correlational in nature. Summarily, Bandura used behavioral observations and questionnaires in assessing people's personality. Study session summary. In this study session, we have discussed the social learning theory of Albert Bandura. We noted that Bandura explained human behavior in terms of continuous reciprocal interaction between cognitive, behavioral, and environmental determinants. We also examined the 4 interrelated mechanisms governing the nature of Bandura's theory of observational learning. These were the attention process, the retention process, the motor reproductive process, and the incentive motivational process.